Hello, I am Michelle Haj-Broussard, and today we are talking about differentiation and immersion. How can we make the match between immersion students and their learning needs? So one of the elements you need to understand in terms of the American educational system is we really like to label students. We like to label them at risk, honors, slow. We have underachiever, on track. We color them red, yellow, green. We like to make labels. But the issue you need to understand with differentiation is that you cannot necessarily go by the labels. You really need to be able to assess the students individually and figure out what their needs are and what their interests are in order to really differentiate instruction for them. So a little bit about some different elements of the American system. Some of you who are American understand this, but just in case you don't, we have two different ways that we can help make the instruction meet the students' needs. One is accommodations. That is where we don't fundamentally alter what's being taught and how it'll be assessed, but it's sort of that middle part of instruction that we can change. And the other is modifications. Now, modifications are going to fundamentally alter either what the students are learning, so their objectives, or how the students are tested or assessed. So in order to do modifications in the United States, you have to have written permission. In other words, you need a paper in their cumulative folder that says that you can make those modifications. It could be a 504 paper. It could be an IEP, which is the Individualized Educational Plan, but it has to say that you may make those modifications. On the other side, in case you don't want to make those modifications, if they have the paper that says that you may make those modifications, it's not may, it's have to. So you must make those modifications if it's on that paper. So just to let you know, if there are modifications that are required in their IEP plan or in their 504 plan, you must make them. There is no choice. If you don't want to make them, you need to get a committee together and decide on different modifications that will help them. But you cannot make that decision on your own as a classroom teacher in the United States. Accommodations, however, you can make those on your own. All right, just to give you a better sense of when these happen, when you're talking about a lesson, you have where are we going, how did we get there, and did we arrive? So in how do we get there, that is how you instruct them. That is the work that they're doing within the classroom in order to get them to learn what you need them to learn. In terms of that, you have a lot more freedom, and those are where you will put accommodations. Where are we going? And did we arrive? Those are the ones, and that's why they're in yellow, that you need to be careful of because you can't change those unless you have permission to change them. So, where are we going? How did we get there? Did we arrive? The where are we going? That's the objective standards and goals. You can only change them if you have written permission. The did we arrive? That's your evaluation criteria, what's going to create grades. You again must have permission before you change those. The instructional content, the process, the product, the how did we get there, that you have control over, and that's where you can make accommodations. So that's where we're going to focus in that sphere of control for this presentation. So there are really 9 types of curriculum adaptations you can make. You can change the quantity, the time, the level of support, input difficulty, output participation. If you have alternate goals or substitute curriculum, you must have that little piece of paper that says you can do those because those are modifications. In terms of the input and output, those are really negotiation. So that's you negotiating understanding with the students, and the output is them negotiation understanding of what they are producing in terms of language. So that is really back to our intro to immersion, that bread and butter of immersion instruction. Can you get it understood even though there is limited understanding of the language? And that's going to be with visuals, with hands-on, with gestures. All of that will be entailed in that. In terms of quantity, I have a warning here, which is if you have an advanced student, please, please, please do not just give them more work. Because what you will do then, if the student finishes and you just pile on more work, is you will either have a student who underachieves or a student who starts to misbehave because he feels he's being punished for doing the work. So you really want to make sure that you do not pile on work if a student is finishing quickly. And we have ways for you to deal with that, accommodations that you can do for early finishers. The next is the level of support. So one of the things within level of support is to pair students up, to buddy them. Again, a warning in terms of advanced students, do not put your advanced student with your struggling student. You want them to be buddied up with someone who is at or just a little bit above their level. If you put the advanced student with your struggling students, then both of them will be frustrated. The advanced student will be frustrated because they don't understand why this other student does not understand something that is clear to them. The other student who's struggling will then feel embarrassed because they're not understanding something and they're frustrating their friend or their peer. So you really want to make sure that you do not put high-level students with low-level students. The other reason is because they're to be unpaid labor. They're not there to do our jobs for us. So we need to make sure that we're also giving them instruction that's going to challenge them and help them move further in their instructional progress, right? We don't want them to be there simply to help us because we need more help in the classroom and they're able to do it. That's not their job. All right, so moving on to options for differentiation. You can differentiate your instruction by readiness, by interest, and by learning profile. By readiness, we mean that based on what they are learning, how ready are they to learn that information? So if you've pre-tested them and you know that certain students are at a higher level than other students, you can change your instruction according to readiness. You can add or remove scaffolding. You can change the complexity of the task. You can maybe change from direct instruction. So a student who's ready will easily be able to do direct instruction whole class, but a student who's not ready might need direct instruction in small groups. You can also differentiate by interest. So in terms of interest, that's going to really motivate the students to learn. So you might have someone who's struggling, but if you get something that they're interested in, they won't be struggling because they're motivated to learn that information. All right, so you want to make sure you have sort of a choice in terms of how they're doing. So if you have, the best I would say would be reading groups. So if you have a number of reading groups, instead of having them always be by readiness level, every once in a while, have reading groups by interest level. So if you have students who are interested in horses, you could have books at a number of different levels for the students about horses that they could then discuss the content. So that way they'll be able to work on their level, but nevertheless all around the theme of horses. And the last one is learning profile. And this is really in terms of how students like to learn, how students are used to learning. Some students like to learn by themselves. Some students like to learn with a friend. Some students like to learn in a group. There are all different kinds of ways that they like to learn in terms of those different intelligences. So some are kinesthetically intelligent, some are musically intelligent. All of those things form their learning profile. So the more that we can match that, the better and the more interesting and the more motivated students will be to learn. One thing to always keep in mind is that VAX, that visual, auditory, kinesthetic, does not actually help in terms of the student's achievement, right? We're just talking about comfort level, right? How comfortable do they feel? And based on comfort level, then you can attack something that is less comfortable for them. So if they're doing something that's difficult for them, the easier we can make the mode of instruction, the better it'll be for them. All right, so moving on to our different approaches, I'm going to give you 3 easy pieces to help you differentiate within your classroom. The first is anchor activities. The second is learning centers. And the third is interest or readiness groups. So sort of a flexible grouping between interest and readiness. So let's talk about anchor activities. So the anchor activity that I have shown here is a choice board. I usually use these as I'm finished activities. So if the students have finished something, then they can choose something from the choice board to do. I make sure that the choice board has something that meets varied learning profiles. So are they mathematical, logical, mathematical? Do they enjoy linguistics, reading? Do they like art? Do they like logic? All of those things are added to the choice board as what they can do. I make it a procedure in my class. I have it both as a procedure that students can do when they finish something. So much better to do this than pile on work for your advanced learners. But also I use it as a way for me to transition from one thing to another. So if we have a 5-minute sponge time that really is not for any instructional purpose, I can fill it with choice board. If someone comes to my class, if they need me in the office, if someone comes to my door and they're interrupting my instruction, I can then tell the students, work on your choice boards. And then that way they can work on them. Sometimes instead of having choice boards, so I can differentiate even more, I will give them folders. So I'll call them either early finisher folder or choice folders, and then they can work in their folders. And I can then make sure that that meets their interests and their levels, the readiness levels. You want to make sure you have activities for different readiness levels in there so that all of your students are able to participate in choice boards. All right, the second thing I have is learning centers. When I create learning centers, and again, even if you're doing direct instruction, you can find 10 or 15 minutes of the day in which they could do a single learning center. So that would be 5 learning centers over the course of a week. You want to make sure that at least 3 learning centers, just for your own sanity, do not change ever. They're always the same thing. That way you're only changing out 2 centers. You want to make sure that you have 1 center that has readiness activities. So if one of your centers is never changing and it's, say, Khan Academy that adjusts to students' levels of mathematics and they can work within their language level because Khan Academy is now in a multitude of languages, then that could be one of your learning centers. You also, and this is a classroom management technique, want to make sure that when you have learning centers that you have a learning center packet. And what that means is a bunch of boring worksheets that people will do to learn the same things that they would learn had they been in the centers. So if your students choose not to go in the centers, in other words, their behavior clearly indicates they do not want to be with their friends or they cannot be with their friends, then you give them that learning center packet that they can do by themselves at the desk and that you can go over with them right before recess, maybe hitting a little into recess so that you can make sure that they're on track with what the other students learned during their center time. And I would say you probably will just need to do this one time, but always have that learning center packet ready just in case. The third easy piece for differentiation is having interest and readiness groups. So your interest groups, you can choose that based on topics. I always suggest that when you go into a classroom that you do some kind of survey, some sort of interest survey, so that you know what your students are interested in and so that you can tailor the class to meet those interests. You could also do readiness. Now, readiness means that they've done a pretest and that you know for this particular curriculum where the students are. Readiness does not mean that you have decided to track your students that these are always the high ones, these are always the mid ones, and these are always the low ones. Tracking does not work with students. You need to allow them growth. You need to allow them to know and not know things. So you want to make sure that you do readiness based on pre-tests or what they did in the previous test to see how well they understand the knowledge that they'll need for this next one. But you never want it to be set groups. You also want to come up with different roles in the groups so that students have tasks that they can complete. You want to make sure that if you do have groups, especially if it's not a teacher-directed group, if you have groups, small groups that work on their own, you want to make sure that they have interdependence. That is something that they all have to create for the group, but also individual accountability. Because you never want one person in the group to have to do all the work so that they can get the grade or finish the product. You want that product to be divided up equally into the group so that each person can be assessed based on their contribution to that group work. So make sure, especially if you're grading anything that is coming out of groups, that you have both interdependence and, most importantly, very importantly for the parents, individual accountability. So you can see, you can pull out the thread of what that particular student did in that group and assess that. So that is very important for grouping. So we have looked at the interest, the readiness, and the learning profile. We're also going to look at differentiating according to the content that is taught, the process in which that content is taught, and then the product at the end that you want the students to be able to create. So easy ways to differentiate content are with learning partners. So that gives them that buddy. For two-way immersion, I suggest that you use a English-Spanish buddy that stays the same, whether they're in the English part of the class or the Spanish part of the class, that sort of flips the roles on the students, so that in one class, one of the students sort of is the resource, and in the other class, the other student is the resource, so they can both have a chance of being the expert. You also could differentiate the content by highlighting and organizing the notes. That would be helpful, especially for a student who has trouble focusing. You can do varied texts, so you could have the same theme but varied content, or audiobooks. And then you can also do activities where they're doing think, pair, share, so that has that buddy support, but you're also doing it at preview, mid-view, and post-view, which sort of gives you a chance to support them. And we'll talk about that in our easy pieces. You can also differentiate the process. Using games is an excellent way to differentiate the process. There's a few reasons why this works. One is students learn through play. They learn a lot more easily through play. The other is it's fun, which means that affective filter, which keeps students from learning languages, that affective filter is down and they're more at ease, which means not only will they learn the content more easily, they'll learn the language more easily. Choice boards help to differentiate the process. Giving them choice in general helps to differentiate the process. But it's always teacher choice 1, teacher choice 2, or teacher choice 3. Having centers lets you differentiate the process, because you could have different readiness or interests or learning profile needs met during the centers. Tiered activities is an excellent way to differentiate the process, because that allows a student to work at their readiness level. And having learning contracts. So if you have a student who's really advanced and you can then take that curriculum and compact it, you can have them do a learning contract so that they continue to learn as you're working with the other students. And then there are easy ways to differentiate the product. You could have the choice boards where the students are giving you a different product based on this choice that you have given them. You could have agreements in terms of what you want the students to produce. You could have a rubric that lets you assess, but they could then create different products. So you are assessing how they understood a story, and they might be doing a song or a poem or a paper in order to express how they understood that story. The rubric is the same. The product that they're giving you is different. And so let's move on to 3 easy pieces for content, product, and process. So one of the easy pieces in terms of content is doing a think, pair, share. So you pair students by readiness levels. Again, we said near their readiness, maybe a little bit higher, but not too far apart. You can ask a question before you begin. So this is the preview. And in the middle of instruction, you can ask another question to make sure that they're understanding instruction. And then at the end of instruction, you can ask different questions again, making sure that the students are understanding what is happening in the instruction and giving them a chance to work with a peer to sort of communicate their understanding. I would give them about 30 seconds at the preview, at the mid-view, and at the post-view to discuss. And then after the discussion, I would give them about another 30 seconds for 1 or 2 pairs to share out. And this allows the students to communicate their understanding or misunderstanding, and it allows you a chance to get a view as to what they are doing. During that 30 seconds, you can also walk around and write down thoughts that you're hearing, problems that you're hearing, so you can discuss them later. In terms of process, we can use tiered instruction. The easiest way for me to explain this to you is by looking at the Eureka Math problem set. So in the Eureka Math problem set, because we evaluate them a lot in mathematics, we know who has the background knowledge and who does not have the background knowledge in terms of mathematics. So we can easily create some readiness groups. You can have the students who struggle more working on fewer problems, say maybe the odd problems to 7. You can have those that are on level working on the even problems and maybe 1 word problem. And then you can have the students who are at the higher level working just on the word problems and then creating their own problems. And after that, you could take those student created problems and add them to your morning work. Now, an easy way to sort of add in some peer buddies to this is have them do the first 1 or 2 problems with a peer buddy that's close to their level. This saves you so much time Because the students then work with their peer buddy, they work with their peer in order to solve problems before they raise their hand. So normally you give a problem set, everyone has to do the same thing. You have about 20 hands that go up. You have to work with 20 students, and it's craziness. But if you have them work with a peer buddy first, and then you have, as soon as they finished 1 or 2 problems, you can check them, giving you assessment along the way. If they have it correct, then they work on their own according to their tiered activity. But if they need help, then you can pull a small group and work with them on specific problems. So this will help your struggling students in a number of ways, because you'll be reducing the load, you'll be giving them a peer buddy so they can communicate their understanding, and you'll be giving them small group work, because once you see that they're all having problems, you can pull them in a small group and work with them while the other students are continuing to do the work individually. And if you've done your anchor activities and have a choice board or an early finisher poster, even when your students finish that work that you've given them, your mid and your advanced students, they still have something to do so that they are not interrupting your small group work. This all works together. Finally, in terms of process, rubrics are really helpful in order to make sure the students are assessed on the same content at the same level, but it allows them some freedom in terms of the products that they turn into you. So if your objective is the learner will write a narrative with a beginning, a middle, and an end, then you could let them do a story, you could let them do a biography, you could let them do a comic book. And then you grade their work according to a rubric that ensures that they have a beginning, a middle, and end, and whatever other elements you're looking at. So those are my 3 easy pieces for content, process, and product. I also have a large list of things to yield sophisticated products. So they could make a dictionary, they could build a planetarium, they could give a demonstration, they could have a panel discussion, they could illustrate a story, they could make a video. There are all different kinds of things that students can do to yield more sophisticated products. So here are 3 easy pieces in terms of readiness, interest, and learning profile. So you want to have anchor activities so they have something to do when they finish early, or that you have something for them to do when you have some sort of administrative task that has come up and you can no longer teach them. So anchor activities are excellent for this, and you could either have an early finisher poster, you could have a choice board, or you could have a choice folder. So you can truly differentiate. Make sure that within those choices, there are things that are at different readiness levels, that you have different learning profiles. So you might have things that they are more visual, more musical, those kinds of things. And you want to make sure that also they can choose in terms of interest. So the topic of whatever they're going to be doing, if they're going to be doing a poem, they get to choose a topic. Then we have learning centers. Again, remember with learning centers, 3 of them don't change. One of those 3 needs to address readiness levels, so some sort of computer program that will go according to the students' levels. And then the 2 other ones are the ones that you're going to change to meet the academic needs of your students. In terms of interest and readiness groups, these are groups that you can change. The readiness groups could be during math, they could be during language arts, where you have the students working at their level according to what they're ready to do. And the interest groups are the ones where the students have different items at their level, but the topic is the same. So all of your students who love horses will be in the same group talking about horses, or reading about horses, or writing about horses. In terms of the easy pieces for content, product, and process, for content, we have that think, pair, share, where the students are talking about the content in small groups or with a partner at the preview level, at the mid-view level, and at the post-view level. It's just a 30-second conversation, and then you use 30 seconds to ask 1 or 2 pairs to share out. For the process, the tiered activity is the simplest thing. Again, you're going to have your students doing either less work for your struggling students or more complex work for your advanced students. And remember that readiness level has to be based on a previous test. You do not want to track them as these are always my high students and these are always my low students. And then you also want to make sure that you're giving your higher students an ability to actually create a problem, which is a much higher level task. For product, you want rubrics. This will allow the students to obtain the objective, but in different ways. You will be able to grade it using the same rubric. So again, writing a story, they could write a story, they could write a biography, they could do a comic book. Same rubric, different work. So these are some easy pieces that you can use for differentiation. I hope that you will be able to easily put these into your classroom. In terms of first things, I would say an early finisher poster is probably the best way to go back into the classroom Monday morning with something that is truly going to help your instruction. Because in immersion, you often have students who are advanced and you need to have something for them to do when they finish early, or it will start to become a classroom management issue. All right, you have a great day and thank you for your time.